We're off to such a good start, aren't we?
Hello comrades, today I'll be debunking some common capitalist arguments against the labour theory of value.
They're not capitalist arguments, they're economics arguments.
So, firstly some basic information. What is the labour theory of value?
Let's cover this properly. When early economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo were pondering how the prices of things were set, they came up with something called cost theory of value. The price of something is dependent on the cost of its inputs. Total up the cost of its inputs with a tiny bit more for some profit, and you get the price. The thing is, they knew their theory was incomplete. For example, a gallon of water costs a lot more during a drought than it does during a rainy season. And even though water is more useful than diamonds still cost more. They understood this, but they had trouble formulating it into an economic theory. They called this the paradox of value. Marx's labor theory of value is an even more simplistic and even more wrong version of cost theory of value, where the only input that matters is labor, and Marx acknowledged none of the immense problems that economists of his time did. All of this was completely falsified and overturned by the marginalist revolution in the 1870s. It started when Karl Menger formulated marginal utility. The price of a good is relative to the value that the person would get out of the next unit produced, not the first. If there aren't that many units of water, then the price is high. But the more plentiful it is, the lower the value of the next unit, or in other words, the lower the marginal utility, and therefore the price. Then, in 1890, Alfred Marshall published the modern formulation of supply and demand theory, which completely debunked all forms of cost theory of value, including labor theory of value.
If you get a whole bunch of linen and you turn it into a coat, the coat is more valuable than the linen.
Is it? Even if you're living in the tropics and it's 95 degrees outside? In that case, it might be worth less than the original linen because it's more difficult to make something more useful out of it. Value is subjective. Marxists have to deny that up and down a blue streak because if they don't, their pathetic cult is absolutely destroyed. Value is based on utility. Someone in a colder climate will value a coat more than someone in a warmer climate because they get greater utility from a coat. Marxists completely ignore this vital aspect.
Now, the labour theory of value wasn't actually created by Marx. Marx expanded on it a lot, but he wasn't the inventor of it. It was actually created by Adam Smith, of all people.
No, he created cost theory of value. We just went over that. He considered all inputs, not just labor. In your analogy, he would have considered the linen itself to be one of the inputs. You morons don't.
And has been supported by plenty of non-Marxist economists.
Citation needed.
So when, right-wingers and pro-capitalists criticize the labour theory of value, they're actually criticizing a theory created by Adam Smith.
Even if this were true, so what? Are we supposed to stick with the physics that Isaac Newton described, even though we know from relativity and quantum mechanics that it only describes a limited part of the universe in a limited way? Cost theory of value describes part of the supply curve. It is by no means a complete description of how value is determined.
They criticize the labour theory of value thinking it's a Marxist idea when it's not. But Marx expanded on it a lot.
No, Marx way oversimplified it. And Marx considered none of the problems with it that Smith and Ricardo and others had pointed out.
Now, one of Marx's theories is that there are three types of value. There is just value, how valuable something is, how much value it contains.
You don't even know the term for this, do you, moron? Or do you just not want to say what it is because then people will know how stupid you are? He's talking about intrinsic value. This is the idea that something has a value written into it by the universe or spake by God or something like that. No one has seriously believed in intrinsic value in 2 centuries. There are 2 contexts in which you'll hear intrinsic value used today, but it's not used to mean a vital aspect of the good or service like ignorant Marxists say. One is simply an investment context where you try and determine the overall value of a company. Another is that it's shorthand for the value as set by supply and demand.
Then there is use value, how useful something is, or how much someone wants it.
And that's called utility. Notice again how this ignoramus apparently doesn't even know the terms.
And exchange value, which is how much it could be sold for.
This isn't really a value at all. It's a ratio. If something is priced in dollars, then that is a ratio between the value of the dollar and the value of the good or service. If a jacket costs $30, then the price tag is claiming that the jacket is worth 30 times what a dollar is worth. If the customer agrees, he buys it. If he doesn't, he leaves it on the shelf. This is how we get the demand curve, something Marxists have to deny up and down a blue streak. As the price of something lowers, more people are willing to buy it. That's really all the demand curve is saying, and so all of this hand-waving is just so Marxists can deny reality.
So one of the criticisms that capitalists have of the labour theory of value is that value is subjective. Each individual will pay their own price for something depending on how much they want it, and it's completely subjective. The hungry man will pay more for some food.
That's marginal utility, not subjective theory of value. Subjective theory of value would say that a wheelchair is more valuable to someone who can't walk than someone who can. And again, even though every reasonable person can see that this is the case, Marxists have to deny it.
This, however, is completely illogical.
Told ya.
Let's talk about food, for example. They say that the hungry person will pay more for food. That might be true, but that does not make the food more valuable.
Yes, it does! The value of a good or service is defined by how much someone is willing to give up to obtain it.
If someone would pay $10 for a loaf of bread, and someone else would pay $5 for a loaf of bread, that loaf of bread is still the exact same loaf of bread. It's the exact same thing. It is no more valuable. It holds no more value.
This guy is incredibly confused. The effect he's talking about is consumer surplus. If someone is willing to pay more than the asking price, then they're getting more of a benefit from it. If we think about that in context of marginal utility, we can see that in most places where water is fairly plentiful, we have major consumer surplus as people are still paying the lower price for water that they drink to survive, even though that survival is worth much more to them. Remember, it's the value of the next unit, not the first. They pay the same for a gallon of water used to stay alive as they do for a gallon of water used to wash their car. So the consumer surplus is the benefit they get from the things they need to stay alive being so cheap. Only a Marxist could be stupid enough to consider that a bad thing.
Yes, some people will pay more for some things than others, but that does not add value.
If it didn't, they wouldn't be willing to pay it. Your own sentence debunks itself.
Think about it logically. It is not adding any more value, the fact that it has more subjective fulfillment to some people than to others. The only thing that is being changed here is the use value and not the actual value of the product.
Do you see the kind of confusion Marxism leads to? Of course something is more valuable to someone who gets more subjective fulfillment out of it. Moron.
In the end, the only value that loaf of bread has is the labour that it has manifested.
So the quality of the wheat has nothing to do with it. How fresh it is has nothing to do with it. How hungry people are has nothing to do with it. The value of all the other things they could buy for that money has nothing to do with it. Are we starting to get the idea here?
The only person that made it more valuable was the baker who put together all the ingredients, and the farmer who farmed the wheat and the truck driver that drove it to the bakery and so on.
All of those things do make it more valuable, but why are they the only things that make it valuable? Because Marx said so? What about all the other aspects I just mentioned? You provide no logical basis for these claims. You just assert them, with nothing to back it up.
Another thing that pro-capitalists argue is that trade creates value. And they point to an example. There's a guy that has food and a guy that has water. And the guy that has food is not hungry, but he's thirsty. and the guy that has water is not thirsty but he's hungry. So the guy that has food gives some food to the guy that has water in return for the guy that has water to give some food to the guy that has food.
This guy can't even word his sentences in an unconfusing way. I'll boil it down for you. If two people trade food for water, then the guy receiving the water values that amount of water more than he values the amount of food he gave up for it. And the guy receiving the food values that amount of food more than he values the amount of water he gave up for it. It's win-win. Both sides trade something they consider to be less valuable for something they consider to be more valuable. And so both of them end up better off. It must be this way with any voluntary transaction, or else the transaction would never have taken place. He had to word it in this confusing way in order to avoid using the word value, because that would have destroyed his entire point. Maybe we should call this labor theory of stupid. You have to put in a lot of work to be this moronic.
However, that is not true. No value was created. They simply exchanged some of their belongings. They didn't create more value. They didn't change the water or the food. That is the exact same water and food. They didn't add any value to it.
Again, just empty assertions. He's just sticking his finger in his ears and screaming, "Is not! Is not! Is not!" But as I just showed, it must be that way. Otherwise, why would the transaction have even taken place?
The last point I'd like to make is that Marxism is a materialist ideology. It is a scientific ideology.
You wish.
And all science is based off evidence.
As opposed to baseless assertions, which is all you've given.
So is there actual evidence for the labour theory of value? And the answer is yes. Most countries these days record what are called input and output tables.
Input-output tables are based on supply and demand. They'd be useless if labor theory of value were true. But even at that, they're pseudoscientific claptrap because they're based on the idea that governments can somehow know what all of these inputs and outputs are, when the economic calculation problem shows that this is just not the case. Companies have trouble figuring these out for their own products and rely quite a bit on trial and error. This is not capitalist in any way. It's what countries try and do when they want a socialist planned economy. And it has never, ever, ever worked.
If you look at a graph showing the input and output data, you'll see that it's almost a straight line going upwards with the amount of labour.
Absolute balderdash. In fact, output tends to go up the less labor is used per unit, because it means that this labor is freed up to create additional units of the product or even a completely new product. What he's doing is showing you aggregate labor, not the labor per unit, which is what he must do if he wants to prove his point. So at best, this is a complete non sequitur. But those of us who understand Blind's law know that people are going to maximize labor even as it becomes more efficient. Less labor per unit means that they're going to produce more units, because the efficiency means that firms are willing to produce more units at a particular price level, which shifts the supply curve to the right. But a shifting supply curve debunks the very notion he's trying to defend here.
So in conclusion, the labour theory of value is correct. All value is created by labour, and capitalist ideas for how value is created are simply false.
His confidence in his idiotic assertion and the horrible way he tried to defend it should tell you everything you need to know about Marxists. Come on, even creationists are better at coming up with arguments for their dingo droppings than this guy! Hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not hit like and subscribe? And to make sure I can keep producing content, support this channel by becoming a patron. And check out all the other great content here, like this video selected especially for you.